So in theory, when, you're working in an industry where rejection is constant and it often is personal, you can either carry every no like it's a weight weighing you down, or you can build this muscle around letting go. So saying next was intended to be a reminder that, one moment does not define my worth, does not define my whole story or path. And I do stand by that.
Welcome to this week's episode of The Dude Therapist. We have the wonderful and amazing Alyson Stoner on, where they truly impact. I don't know about anyone listening here, but anyone who grew up in the 90s knew Alyson Stoner, whether it was the white girl in Missy Elliott videos, and in the end, somebody who embodies the idea of vulnerability, honesty, and you all have to pick up a copy of their book. It is impactful. But before we get into the meat and potatoes and the whole meal that we're going to get to of talking about the unbelievable vulnerability that they bring, just a little taste. Alyson, could you introduce yourself to the listeners if they don't know who you are yet?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I am Alyson. I am originally from Ohio, now based on the West Coast because of my unexpected life path in entertainment. Today, I thankfully am a New York Times bestselling author. I'm the founder and CEO of a mental health company called Movement Genius. And I'm also a certified mental health practitioner, including being a coordinator on the very kinds of sets that I grew up acting on. So it's been quite a full circle moment now to share my story in the memoir and also reintroduce myself as an adult professional who is not just the little girl in the Missy Elliott videos anymore.
You know, your book comes out with a bang right in the beginning. I love that little voice that you do as a kid, and then go back into that dichotomy of thought. It is just filled with different stories that shaped who you are. And then one moment, you now tell your story from your voice, not the child's voice, not your mom, not your dad, not John, none of those people. It's now yours. What shifted from it being, this is my story to tell, and I'm going to have that power?
Wow. Well, first the moment I realized that my own story had never been told by my own voice, that I had mostly only been spoken about, I was flummoxed. The image I'm getting is as if the real me were shoved down into a basement and there were these gatherings and parties upstairs where people tossed around names and maybe my character was a topic of gossip, but I myself wasn't able to even represent my own story, and I think that's interesting for someone who's in the public eye. We as an audience at home are able to feel a safe enough distance from them that we can treat them however we'd like. We can project onto them, we can idolize or degrade them. We may work for a company who profits off of their name and image. Yet we still have the real people somewhere hidden, unseen. And so I think with the memoir in particular, initially I was intimidated by using my voice to tell my own story because it felt impossible to find a megaphone larger than the past reputation, or the characters and media associations. So I think, I didn't think I would be able to reclaim my voice in this public way. I actually was willing and practicing this, aspect of settling for accepting that things would be beyond my control, that I couldn't control other people's perceptions of my story, and that I would just focus on healing privately. So, all that said, now that there is a memoir, it is in my voice. It's in permanent ink, for better and worse. Even though it was an arduous process, releasing it to the world feels like the first inhale after you've been underwater far too long.
Wow. That last description is so sad but so real to connect to. And when anyone who's listening or reading the amazing words and powerful way I listened to it, I wanted to hear you like tell your story, especially with memoirs who are said and spoken by the person. I don't know, it hits heart. It hits your heart. And so it's such a powerful thing to hear how that inner child, that inner voice that you were talking about. And it reminds me of Inside Out. It reminds me of a therapeutic model called IFS, internal family systems. The different parts of us. Can you speak maybe to that idea of where authenticity lies within that realm and tornado of parts that you are the dancer today, you are the singer today, you are the writer today, you are whatever role that you were put in, whether it was the protector in that moment where John and your mom are fighting, whatever that was, how do you find that piece of you? Because that piece runs through every part of it. But how do you find that voice to make sure you don't get lost amongst that drowningness?
What a question and what a quest. I think in some ways it's felt like it's a lifelong adventure in reclaiming these parts and integrating them into a sense of, a whole self. I think as much as I would love to pretend that my sense of self is fixed and that once I find it, I keep it and it stays exactly the same, in reality, for my experience, I've recognized there's actually some fluidity here in our identities over the course of a lifetime. Because if I'm deeply affected by the world around me, by my relationships, interactions, events, and these are shaping me, well, as those experiences and relationships evolve, so might I. And as someone who I think worked so hard to try to be a quote unquote good person according to a certain set of rules growing up, it was quite a transition for me to realize, oh, that was only ever one narrow account of goodness. It wasn't the only version of showing up as a quote unquote decent human. And that life might present a lot of surprises and detours where I'm now being invited to experience my sense of self in a totally different way than I ever expected. Things that I would choose now in terms of setting boundaries, I once 10, 15 years ago might have thought that that person was being aggressive. Well, now I understand without these boundaries, I'm actually allowing, people to violate my safety sometimes. If you read the book, you'll know different instances I'm referring to. So this this idea of authenticity, I think, is sometimes it's almost a poetic term. We have to take some creative liberties here because what feels true and grounding in one season might shift. So, if anything, I think it's been learning to have compassion for all of these different iterations of self, all of these different aspects, including the messy ones, including the ones that we would consider flawed, um, and and allowing myself to continually expand to include more parts, so that I'm not, you know, exiling or icing out uh, the parts that feel, too scary or too inconvenient or too overwhelming. If that makes any sense.
I love it. I'm getting so emotional just in my eyes, just like hearing the way, listening to the book and hearing you talk about it. To me, there was a very iconic, I think it was either chapter two, chapter three in the beginning, when that Missy Elliott fame just started kicking off that year, see next to Timbaland. But to me, it was I think it was like two sentences or three when you and your mom have an interaction in the supermarket with that random person or who came up to you and said, perform, like do a dance, be the circus monkey, right? It's so exciting. And your mom had a game plan with you that we are going to put a smile on and be on the second you leave the house. And by the way, that's what reminds me of when I see your cover. This like squished face against the cover is like forced. It feels forced. And there's no freedom to allow yourself to step back. It's like someone is pushing you to do and go and be when maybe you don't want to. I don't know, that's what when I heard that and that part of going out into the world, I know I connect with that. I'm a very happy go lucky person. And when I'm ever off, when I was younger, something must have been wrong with me because I'm not smiling and jokey. I had to be the singy song. I was in a choir as a kid, a Jewish choir. I traveled the world performing. Sing for me was a lot of the people in my world. And to not have to do that and to choose, that's so empowering. So how do you grapple with that? Because it was performative to be successful, but you also enjoyed it at times, but you just wanted the choice to say, I want to do that. How do you remind yourself? How do you accept that? Or how do you maybe tell people who are listening that now the choice is yours and that's okay, even though it might have a hint of being a little performative because of their memory or the trauma?
Mm. A few things come to mind, and it kind of ties in our previous question around authenticity. So, I work with a counselor who co-designed this toolkit with me called Artist Wellbeing Essentials. And she sometimes guides people through this exercise called 3 chairs. And one chair represents your quote unquote authentic self, whatever that might be. The second chair represents your artistry. And if you're not, an artist by trade, you can think about this as your sort of daydreaming, creative self. And then the third chair for people pursuing this professionally, that represents your brand, your commercialized, commodified product self. And she has people sit down in each of the chairs and take inventory of, let's say, your daily schedule or, what responsibilities you have in wearing each of these hats. And you'll notice, similar to, some parts work in IFS, that each part of yourself has different needs and responses to that schedule. Your artist, creative, daydreaming self might be so excited that you get to just uh, create all day long on your day off. But that commercial brand self might kick in and say, uh-oh, I'm worried that we're not being productive enough and you're not visible enough. And so you might need to get yourself out there and make, one more TikTok so that you don't lose future professional gigs. And then that authentic self might be saying, oh gosh, while I love parts of this creative process, I also feel so vulnerable. This is just maybe even unmanageable to be this honest while I'm creating. And so you start to, be able to have these conversations where you recognize we might have a variety of responses to this in this case, answering the question around performing or feeling like you have to be on, there might be many parts of us that respond to this differently. And as we get to know these parts, the intention, hopefully, is that we can choose which part is in the driver's seat. Some parts end up having more strengths to meet that moment. For example, when I'm in that grocery store, my persona, you know, the budding sense of that commercialized branded self, that actually was probably the best part to take care of that moment. However, what I didn't know as a child was how to shift back into my authentic self being in the driver's seat after. So I learned to just stay in that commercialized or performance based self. And it ended up being sometimes at the expense of my daydreaming self or my authentic self having space. So, I might invite people to reflect on which situations in their lives, which relationships tend to flip that switch on of some kind of performance, and then reflect on what we might be able to do as a practice after to make sure we kind of exhale, maybe remove that mask, set it down and say, "Hey, thanks part. You did a great job handling that moment, and now let's return to, that sense of wholeness." And then the other aspect that came up when you asked that question was the importance of having enough private spaces in our lives where we can experiment outside of being, visible, and perhaps, being judged, or just having to deal with being perceived. I think there's something really important that in our current culture of oversharing our lives online gets lost when we don't allow ourselves that internal space, that sacred privacy to just be. So if you don't have a space like that, it might be worth considering how you might weave those moments in, and notice who you are then, and I imagine that might help us start to connect with that authentic self.
Oh, I love that. It reminds me the three chair thing is used very often with trauma work, and it's sitting trauma work to be if you were that person and you would want to talk to them or speak for them, and it's you by yourself jumping from chair to chair in different situations of an experience, say, oh, if I was can go back and embrace that part. And it's a very common thing, not used as often as it used to be. It used to be a very common work in trauma, but it's amazing to hear how that translates into other ways. I love that. Um, Something really funny for me when I was listening was the idea of screaming next. I loved that. How you and your mom and you tried it with John. It wasn't so receptive at times, but this idea of on to the next. And I was taught as a kid from my parents the idea that if you never try, the answer will always be no. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It could be yes because, but if you never try, the answer will always be no. And it really connected to me those two things of I'm going to do my best but next, because there's other things. I did what I had to do, on to the next thing. And if it goes well, it's because I did something, not because I hid or avoided, but because I put myself out there in the best light, in the best way, with the best performance, the best action I can do. How has that shaped your current mental health? And maybe how can people integrate that into like daily life? Because I think it's such an important thing that, I don't know, as a parent, as a husband, we have interactions that don't go so well. You snap at your kid, you have a hard moment, and to mentally say next because there is an opportunity tomorrow or later. How would you shape that for people, and how did it shape you as a person?
I will say that saying next after being rejected at an audition or just directly after leaving the audition, it was well intended and there were some useful aspects to it, but I do think it was only half baked when I was younger. So in theory, when you're working in an industry where rejection is constant and it often is personal, you can either carry every no like it's a weight weighing you down, or you can build this muscle around letting go. So saying next was intended to be a reminder that one moment does not define my worth does not define my whole story or path. Um, and I do stand by that. However, I now recognize that at the time, rejection came with a lot of thoughts and feelings that I never processed. So I think if I were to make a 2.0 version of the tool, I would want to first make sure I wasn't downplaying or dismissing the immediate impact. And I gave myself a chance to, acknowledge without judgment that, wow, this really was challenging, or wow, it sounds like this is hard because XYZ. Um, and then I think I would zoom out to the bigger picture and remind myself now is not forever, which is a mantra that I use a lot in a lot of different contexts. And, for someone who finds themselves prone to spiraling after things don't go their way, first of all, our brains are wired for certainty and safety. So it makes sense that if something goes poorly, or it matters to us and it doesn't shake out the way we had hoped, that it might rattle our foundation. Um, that said, I thought about this idea the other day, creating some kind of sticky meter where I ask myself, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how sticky was this experience in terms of it really staying with me? If it's a 1 to 3, I might just be able to physically shake my body and shake off that stress and redirect my thoughts and move on. But if it's an 8 or 9, I might actually need to lean on some real skills that I've learned over the years. I might need to, you know, express this energy, whatever that emotion might be, if I'm feeling angry or if I'm feeling insecure or whatever. And I also might need to actually carve out some kind of quote unquote release ritual where I let myself, vent out the thoughts, empty them out, and then shift my, mindset. Like it just might take a little bit more care. But at the core of this, I think, is an opportunity to start recognizing which of these moments tend to be my 8 to 10 sticky moments, and then preemptively creating a strategy before I go into that situation, knowing this might feel sticky. What kind of affirmation, tool, process can I set up so that hopefully I can not only manage the experience better on the other side, but maybe eventually I might not have to even spiral. I might be able to find a detour around it because it's like, oh, it's this familiar thing. Ah, I see. This thing, it's hitting that, it's striking that same chord every time. So, I've found over the years just that increased self-awareness and patience really goes a long way in not feeling stuck in my own mind and knowing, oh, we've got options. Yes, spiraling is an option, but I don't know that that's what I want to do if I can find another way.
That is so unbelievable, the next 2.0, as just such a skill that we all can use. I love the sticky. I can really hear sticky notes in different colors and just how it, or just a gum on the bottom of your shoe and how it can last with you for a while and you never get it off until you hear it squeaking and you're like, what is that? And then you look and it's there. Sometimes it's a 1 or 3, but I love that reality check of what it means. That's so important. Um, I want to take a step back a little bit, big picture, right? You've mentioned in other podcasts and other interviews this idea that you hope that this book is the last of its kind. And it's interesting, the last 3 years, you, Drake from Drake and Josh, and other actors from the Nickelodeon, Disney 90s, early 2000s are writing these memoirs, docuseries, whatever it might be, about the honesty of the entertainment industry. And you said something recently about the child actors being a commodity that's being used. And it really hit such a chord because people never saw it that way. We looked at it as every other actor and actress. They're on the TV in, you know, Cheaper by the Dozen or whatever movie we fell in love with from those wonderful times. But reality was not so much on the backdrop of what was going on. So, as a generation of people who are now becoming aware, in the people who are in their 30s and 40s, who grew up in that time, do we just nix Disney and Nickelodeon, or like, how do we help? How do we be like, now that you guys are bringing so much power with voice and awareness that we never saw because we weren't there? What's the goal? What's the hope?
That is a multi-pronged question, and I think it's helpful to name a few things. First, by no means am I claiming that absolutely every element of my childhood was negative or hard. There were beautiful benefits and privileges that accompanied working in entertainment. Second, sometimes we assume that children are just mini adults, but we don't actually have, as children, the same cognitive faculties, the same ability to give fully informed consent, the same capacity to understand short and long-term implications of situations. So, when we're in an adult workplace, we just have to keep in mind the industry was designed for and by adults. Therefore, inherently, these aren't developmentally appropriate or developmentally informed spaces, the same way that perhaps a school or a children's athletic league, rec league might be hopefully designed with. So, with that context, I do see this tendency in our culture to name, blame, shame individuals. And while there absolutely are a handful of people, probably in most crowds, who truly need to be held accountable, perhaps fully removed from an industry until they prove, that they've changed their behavior. For the most part, I think this is where the tougher, more patient process of repair and reform takes place. I believe that, I wouldn't expect everyone in entertainment to be a licensed trauma therapist and to know everything about child development. But when you start to bring in mental health coordinators on sets, we can help identify certain practices, certain processes that can easily better support the young artists without interfering with, the company's bottom line or the schedule. But then when it comes to legislation, a lot of people are surprised to know that child actors are not included in child labor laws. So we don't view entertainment as the same kind of child labor. Understandably, it is different, from a young person maybe working on the family farm, etc. However, that does leave room for exploitation to happen without proper protections. For example, I was working collectively, probably 80-hour work weeks between training, rehearsals, being on set, press junkets, etc. And that takes a toll on a young mind and body, of course. Um, so I think it's got to be a collection of shifts. We have to look at policies that protect children, not only in traditional entertainment, but now also digital spaces. And we have to, shift things on set. And I think for, the general public at home, as you read or listen to the memoir, I think you might notice different shifts within your own approach to consuming content of young people or sharing content of your little ones. And that's the kind of contemplation and dialogue that I'm hoping for, because this isn't just about protecting a small subset of child performers who do deserve care no matter what. It's also how we collectively view children's rights and autonomy, how we view what kind of safety we believe people deserve in this digital, visible world that we're living in. There's a lot of other things that actually affect all of us.
I love that. And I didn't know that, I have a colleague of mine who's an intimacy coordinator on sets. Is the mental health coordinator becoming a norm?
Well, that is our hope. I am working on my capstone project, and I will be certified to be a mental health coordinator in just a few weeks, as long as I pass my final exam. But I feel pretty strongly that I will. And yes, for those who are unfamiliar, intimacy coordinators have just become standardized. It took about 8 years of effort in showing that it's important if you're filming scenes that involve not only romantic intimacy, but perhaps physical violence and the choreography of bodies in really intimate scenarios, that someone on set who's an expert can help make sure it's done safely, respectfully. And so, similarly, mental health coordination can provide a range of services, some of them being, making sure that the cast and crew are aware of what themes are being covered that day on set and making adjustments to, best care for everyone psychologically, physically, etc. And because of the uniqueness of media and storytelling, it's just a different kind of workplace than if you're going in and my time in the office for my mental health company looks very different than being in a group space where a bunch of adults and maybe some kids are collectively playing make believe and might be reenacting really traumatic material all day long. It's just it requires different different skills. The same way that if I were on a construction site, I would hope they've implemented some protocols to protect everyone.
I love that. That's why in my schedule I have different colors for different things because it reminds my brain to go, okay, the orange is the clients, the red is, the podcasting, the purple is this. So it kind of just sets my brain to be able to look at a schedule and go, oh, here are the pockets. Here are the things that I need to kind of switch my mode. Few more questions. One of them for me is that you show up with such honesty in your social media, in your book. And honesty is very hard to do sometimes, especially in the public eye, especially in the things that you've done in your life and being in that circles. Has that cost you anything and have you gained anything and gotten anything back in return from talking about trauma, the eating disorders, your identity, who you are and who you want to be?
Hmm. Oh, I didn't realize how much of my life was just upholding the status quo. Um, I didn't realize that upholding the status quo was often at the expense of being fully honest. And this is a generalization, but until I began to challenge the status quo by raising my voice or um, daring to accept, parts of me as a queer person when the community around me said, absolutely not, that's not okay. That's when I started to feel the cost of honesty. Um, but the cost and the benefit do feel like two sides of the same coin. So, on the one hand, when I was upholding the status quo, even when I felt friction or dissonance with different situations in life, I would just then absorb those myself, and they might lead to aches and pains in my own body. But outwardly, I would still uphold the status quo like I was quote unquote supposed to do. Whereas now, that friction and dissonance actually get transmuted into, proactively advocating for change outwardly. And when that energy gets to be applied to addressing what I, uh, perceive to be issues that need improvement, then I can actually not have to harbor all of that dissonance in my own body. And I've found that one of the benefits of being honest, even if it has shaken up the world around me, is that I actually get to experience equilibrium that comes from self acceptance, that comes from, walking in integrity. And now, of course, there are lots of different scenarios we could test here, and it's not going to apply to everything perfectly. But I will say, generally, I have, I've never regretted making decisions in, my best estimation of integrity. I have only felt regret or guilt when it relates to compromising. And frankly, the bolder I become, or the more practiced I become in quote unquote speaking truth to power, it's hard to fathom ever returning to a smaller or quieter space. And I see I'm thinking about kind of like systems and justice and things like that now. I see just how harmful it can be for me to not uh, use my voice. So, yeah, there's a trade-off, but the ultimate vision is hopefully for, the world to be improved for everyone's sake and for the planet's sake. So if that's the intention, and I'm doing my absolute best to aim for that, then I'm more okay these days with ruffling feathers and managing the necessary judgment and consequences that come with it. There are people who just no longer wanted to employ me because they knew I was queer. There were relationships, speaking just to queerness, that where people no longer wanted to interact with me. I knew I was the same person as the day before, but that really created a schism for them, and I said, well, I can't. I'd rather be rejected while I'm accepting myself than be accepted while I'm rejecting myself.
Oh, that's a deep one. It's a deep one. I love that line. That is so powerful for anyone to hear because sometimes we make ourselves small to make someone else comfortable. When in reality, you're just rejecting yourself. You're not making yourself small. You're literally just shutting your reality and your trueness for someone else's comfort. And then you're not you. You're them. You're a reflection of them and the mirror of them. That's not who you are. And, for people who don't have the platform like yours, who haven't been, in that spotlight, we talk about silence, this idea of smallness. What would be one step that someone in their life can start expressing just so they don't feel so quieted?
Hmm. Well, so my immediate response to that is pulling from, my experience of silencing my own voice. I used to always try to solve all of these things alone. Um, and so I don't necessarily want to provide another tool where you're trying to recognize yourself, witness yourself, heal and repair relationships and connections all alone. Um, I would say, even though it may be true that it's really hard to find a safe place sometimes to reach out to someone and to be witnessed, I do believe that there are online forums, even if you need to be anonymous at first, to feel safe enough. There are maybe community gatherings where you have a shared interest with someone. There maybe is one friend or a loved one who you can text or call and say, "Hey, I'm I'm feeling really unseen and unheard, and to ask, like, do you have 3 minutes to just be with me? And for me to feel myself being witnessed. Um, that's what comes to mind first. And if that is not available and you do need to, find your own version of self-recognition, as it were, maybe, there's a practice, even just for a few minutes a day, where, for some people, they like to look in the mirror and do that kind of self-witnessing. I actually, because I've been around mirrors my whole life in entertainment, I really do not love mirror work in that way. Yeah, it just doesn't that's not my cup of tea. But if it is for you, great. But other ideas might be opening up a voice memo and being able to, have the device be the listening ear, and you can let yourself stream of consciousness share what the experience of your day was, not just what you did, but what the experience of it was, and notice, what how did that feel when that happened? Perhaps that would feel a bit like you're, being witnessed and recognized. Um, and maybe there's another practice. I'm not sure what that would be like for you, but what do you think? Do you have any ideas on this one?
I love that. I love by the way, I totally connect with the mirror thing. I don't like looking in the mirror and saying, "You are the," like, it feels uncomfortable to me, and I don't always suggest it to clients because a lot of people actually do feel that way, that looking at yourself in the mirror and talking to you is very uncomfortable, or sometimes just like, "What am I doing? I'm in my bathroom yelling at a mirror." But for people who love it, good for you. I'm very proud of you. But for most people, it doesn't. I love the voice memo. I've suggested that. And I always carry around a journal. I have a journal next to me right now because it is a conversation with the abyss. It's not, it's something, somebody, somewhere. It could be anyone and everything. You can write it to an old friend or a mentor or someone that speaks to you or is connected to you. It doesn't have to be here in the present. It could be in your mind that you are talking to them and imagining this conversation. And you're not out there or, you know, so to speak, crazy because you're talking to somebody from your past. It could be a very healing process to just put it down on paper, brain dump, so to speak, to somebody that you would feel comfortable with if they're not there with you right here, right now.
Yeah, that sparked an idea, and I appreciate those recommendations. And I'm thinking, oh, I might want to try that later today. Um, I I was also thinking, if it truly feels like you're being silenced, maybe there's a process of learning how to use your voice as tiny as it might need to be in the beginning, until you can truly use your voice aloud. So maybe, the first step is just in your own mind, hearing your voice, saying whatever you feel like needs to be said, making that statement a few times and going, okay, that was the version of using my voice that I can do today. And then maybe the next time it becomes writing it down and seeing it on the paper. Or if you feel compelled, actually texting someone else who can witness whatever that statement is. And maybe incrementally working your way up to actually using your voice in that, you know, more prominent way. Um, and of course, some situations might be more urgent than others. There may be a situation where there's a deadline for you to speak up on something. And in those moments, I might offer, we're not always going to be able to be perfectly comfortable. We're not going to always feel perfectly safe when we need to use our voices. But let's remember that we can still have different skills that help us manage that discomfort, so you can still ultimately move forward using your voice and not later wish you had. But you were just waiting for the perfect ideal scenario. a lot of times life is just it's gonna be a mix of factors and, we're doing our best. Like, we can only control what we can control and also, gosh, like, just every day, depending on whether you slept well or had a tough day yesterday, or so many variables might affect what it feels like to use your voice on, when you need to speak up. So, lots of grace.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I have 3 more questions, but I just wanna touch on what you just said real quick is that a lot of people think that their best is 100%, and what people sometimes need to hear is that sometimes your tank is only 20% full, and that is your best today. And tomorrow could be 75%, whatever. So I like to do a thing called a tank check-in. What's your engine saying? Like the engine light? Because then it could be literally be 50%. You go, that's how much I have to give. And if I give as much as I can out of that tank, that is my best versus the shame or the pain or the self-hate that we give ourselves like, oh, I didn't do my best today because I'm not at 100. Yeah, you didn't sleep well last night. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe you got into a fight with maybe this happened. You got rejected from 7 things yesterday. You're not supposed to be at 100. Your tank is drained and low. That tells you one thing. And number two, now you have a gauge of how much you can give. So I think it's a very similar thing of like, right now I can only give the little inner voice. And then it's that acceptance of where you're at and how much you can actually perform and do for yourself, I think is an unbelievable suggestion. Thank you. That's a great idea. Um, we have two more things, but then the third thing is about all you're doing now with the mental health coordinator and all that awesomeness. Um, you talk a lot about the relationships over the years in your book with your mom, your siblings, dad, all these different things. And there's a lot of hurt and pain from different people at different times, like anyone else of life. How have you learned to trust people, especially as someone who has been in the world of Hollywood and fame, where I'm sure, you know, doesn't take a genius to realize that people use those who are famous to get ahead. Oh, I have a relationship with you because you're going to get me connected to this person. And it's like very feels dirty and muddy. How do you learn to retrust people when there's been so much trauma or pain? And that could be for anyone who's been hurt before in a relationship. How do you repair that and move forward in a relationship?
Hmm. What comes to mind that relates to performance spaces and everyday life um, is the practice of creating containers for experiences. Now, when I was in performance mode, there were specific tools I wish I knew then, but I do now, that helped me enroll, get into character, and de-roll, get out of character. And in the middle of the performance, as my supervisor often explains, if it feels as if that experience is starting to come to a boil, you're starting to feel like, uh-oh, I'm about to feel so overwhelmed that I might shut down. Then you think of ways to simmer that intensity while you're in the thick of it, before you're able to fully de-roll. Now, if we were to extrapolate that to our everyday lives, there's this aspect of creating containers where if I know I'm about to go into a challenging conversation, or I'm going to be doing something far outside my comfort zone, and it's likely that my body is going to feel quite dysregulated, and rapid heartbeat and sweaty palms and everything that comes with it for my system. I've found what's helpful is naming before it starts that there will be an end. There will be a process of being okay after this. That has gone such a long way, and I see it be helpful, when I work on, dance conventions with young dancers, where I let them know this competition will come to a close, so it helps them know, okay, these uncomfortable feelings, relatively speaking, are temporary, and I'm gonna get to the other side of this. So that can go a long way, and, um, I found that it helps also, for me at least, I know it will be different for everyone, but for those of us who have busy schedules or you wear multiple hats, maybe you're a parent, maybe you're a professional, maybe you're a community service member, etc. Uh, Sometimes it can feel blurry, and there can be this sort of emotional bleed off from one experience into the other. And so when I think about creating containers throughout the day, okay, I'm going into this thing, I'm wearing this hat, it comes up, these feelings come up here. Now I'm shifting into the next moment. In that transition, I say, okay, how can I, from, you know, for lack of a better term, de-roll, release that part of myself, take off that hat, and then shift into the next thing. Now, for me, and I'm sure for others, we're not going to be able to perfectly keep everything contained. But what it can allow us to do is have these micro releases, micro resets throughout the day where we're completing that threat response cycle, giving our bodies and minds a chance to say, whew, that is over. It is over. I am okay. We are moving forward, so that we don't end up accidentally lashing out on a loved one or, feeling so burned out by the end of the day that we're quote unquote good for nothing for 5 days thereafter. So I think container practices could be, for some of us, useful. And, if you hear this and you say, absolutely not, that is not what my body and mind need, then honor that. Trust that. Find an alternative.
Yeah. I watched some interviews with the cast of It, and the fear they had of Skarsgård when he was just talking to them, like, but not in character as himself. And they couldn't separate it because they're like, 1 second, we just did a scene where you ran after me screaming, drooling, and I know we were acting, but now I'm supposed to just turn that off and just be like, he's like, hey guys, that was a great take. And you're supposed to just be just have a regular interaction. So having like a mental health coordinator on it to help with that processing of going through something, even though it's play, even though it's drama, theater, whatever it might be, it feels real. Your body can't tell the difference. So it's very important for someone to be on scene to be like, okay, here's what happened. Here's how that felt. It wasn't real, but your body thinks it is. Let's like pull that back a little bit and process that. Because in The Body Keeps the Score, which is an amazing book by Bessel van der Kolk, right? Sometimes just because the threat is gone doesn't mean the stress is gone. It stays in the system, even though you are now safe. It lingers. So for you with that healing process, how have you I know you've talked about movement being a huge part of that healing, but to me, it takes, a lot of work, which I know that you've spoken about doing, which is so powerful and so amazing to hear. How do you not let that linger? And what has been that journey for you to let that stuff go or move through it better?
My process started in therapy, learning about my own body's signals. I realized that I was so out of touch with them. I didn't know what a full body yes or full body no or full body maybe felt like. I th- because I didn't have that awareness or that practice, it made it all the harder to navigate interactions with people. Because how would I know if you crossed a line if I never drew where the line was in the first place? How would I know if this, were a trustworthy experience if I haven't really defined what trust means and might feel like? And for me, I had to practice those things with myself first, and gauge, from there on, like what kinds of interactions seem to align with that sense of trustworthiness, or at least I would be able to communicate to others, hey, this is what trust feels like to me. What does trust feel like to you? And we can find the path forward. So some elements that I guess I look for, or that I intend to offer are a sense of mutual disclosure. I'm not saying we need to tell each other everything, but just that I'm looking for something that's not one sided. And as a performer, oftentimes what it felt like was that I actually made myself fully available to others to have access to my time, my energy, my body, etc. But I never got to know anything about the people in the audience. So everyone knew a lot about me. I did not know anything about them. And it felt so bizarre. It felt more like I was on display than being in some kind of relationship. So, in building trust, I'm now looking for reciprocity, that there's some kind of evenness, not always perfectly, but just generally speaking, a give and a take. And then I think in terms of, repairing things after there's been hurt, or after, you've experienced betrayal or you have been taken advantage of. Obviously, every situation is so different. So we have to assess, like, is this even physically safe enough to do the repair work, or do I really need to walk away? Um, if it seems like both parties involved are wanting to, you know, collaboratively work together to move forward, then something I look for is, are we aligned with what our ultimate goal is for this conversation or for this relationship? And what's been a bit dicey and confusing to navigate over the years, but I think I'm maybe flexing that muscle more frequently enough that I'm like, I think I have the hang of it, maybe, is that some relationships and scenarios, when there's been that moment of, let's say, damage, or, there's a break of some kind, um, sometimes that's a signal of a deeper incompatibility where no matter what we try to do, we're going to keep running into this fundamental incompatibility. We've got different values ultimately. We want to go different places. And that breaking point might actually be a signal to say, okay, let's, to the best that we can, lovingly, respectfully allow ourselves to diverge from here. That repair work can still happen in terms of, creating an exit strategy that's kind and compassionate, but it doesn't mean that I have to repair in order to stay in that relationship per se, if that's what makes sense for that situation. On the other hand, if there's some kind of breaking point and I'm realizing, oh, okay, we really missed each other on this one, but I know ultimately that we're aiming for something similar, that our paths are running parallel, or we'd like them to. Well, then, you start to use whatever the kind of the mixture of structured conversations and flow to try and listen to each other, and have empathetic conversations until you align on what the game plan is. Um, and I will say, as someone who tends to be hyper independent and historically was more avoidant in how I responded to conflict, I try now to let people know up front, my initial reaction is not personal. This is my tendency. I might feel like I'm pulling away for a moment. I want you to know I'm committed to returning to this conversation. I just got to figure out how to move through this knee-jerk reaction, and, let's set a time to revisit this. So they know I'm not trying to hurt them while I take space initially. So I think if you kind of know your reaction style in terms of conflict or breaking points, that might also be helpful if you're wanting to repair with someone, being able to offer that information up front. Hey, this thing, it's going to happen. It tends to happen, but I'll meet you on the other side, and you matter, and this is worth repairing.
Oof. So I just finished writing my book, actually, and it's called From I Do to We Do. It's a relationship book. And in the chapter on communication, I just wrote that formula for when people have that avoidant tendency to say, hey, I'm just letting you know up front, here's how it is. I still care, love, concerned about you, and I will come back. So it's like the sandwich so that someone knows. So I love that you said that and that you've embraced that because it's so integral for everyone to be on the same page. I have one last question. I showed my daughter, my 6-year-old daughter, um, the video of you, just the snippet of you in Missy Elliott's video, and then your comeback on stage. And I said, what do you think about this? And she said, power. She said, power. Your movements, your smile, your facial expressions. She goes, she's a little bit of a dancer. She loves to make dances and she's a cutie pie and I love her to pieces. She said, power. And something that I see when I look at your journey and look at you is strength, is power. But that's been redefined. It's been shifted. It's been moved over the years, whether it's power of voice, power of song, power of dance, whatever that is. And now it's this power of mental health that you are just on this tear of awesomeness to help people feel seen, respected, and be healthy. What does strength mean to you today now that you sit back with this book sitting next to you and this journey? What does power or strength mean to you?
Hmm. Well, I love that you're listening to your daughter's input on what comes up for her when she watches different things. That's so beautiful. And so wonderful that, she perceived power. I do believe there is an element of being in my relative power now. I'd say strength used to give a feeling tone of harshness and or discipline, um, and now strength feels like walking integrity as often as possible, including and perhaps especially when it does not benefit me to do so. Um, I think strength now also includes more readily embracing my flaws and shortcomings, whereas before I was quite self-protective of my reputation, or I struggled to admit my own human frailties. And now I think I actually experience a different kind of strength and courage by acknowledging the fullness of um, my human foibles and aptitudes. Um, so I think in my daily life, something I'm proud of is my persistence, and specifically, taking off my performer hat and putting on my small business owner hat. As you know, there are so many unfun tasks and inconvenient setbacks and tiresome processes involved in making progress, whatever progress you're after. But I'm really proud of myself for following through anyway on all of those cumbersome things, and in committing to building new skills beyond performing so that I can show up in the world and in different spaces. Um, and that I'm willing to now constantly be humbled by being new at something or bad at something. I think once upon a time, perfection was my protective mask, and I feared imperfection and failure. And now I almost chase after failure because I know, oh yeah, this is actually just it leads to growth ultimately. Um, so I think that's what strength is feeling like, this mix of integrity and also acceptance of all of it in life.
Wow. Well, I just want to say thank you for all the memories in the 90s and the early 2000s. And thank you for all that you do for the voice of mental health. As a therapist, you don't really see a lot of people in your shoes step up to talk about those things. And unfortunately, it happens when stuff has happened in the past and now they're growing. But the growth that you are doing in the background and the darkness is shining through for so many people to feel seen and respected. And it is just empowering for people who watch, people who are in the therapy world. Really appreciate all that you're doing. And the book is unbelievable. I'm so happy it's New York Times bestseller. It deserves it. It deserves to be on everyone's shelf. Guys, buy it. It's a wonderful read. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Follow now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and finally, see me on YouTube at The Dude Therapist.